That sometimes is very frustrating to me.
Yeah, there are many things there. Some people, I suppose, want to be free, and certitude sometimes is a cage. At least they would think it. All of us want to be free. It depends where you find your freedom, in surrender or in your own ideas or what.
You know, I want to pick up on a point you made, because I think it's important to flesh that out a little bit, and flesh it out in terms of, you see, like, some people are allergic to certitude. And I think it's a very important statement to talk about in terms of, let me play the devil's advocate and say, like, a lot of people might say, I'm allergic to a truth that's too simple. So, you know, that's too one-sided, or too, that doesn't get the complexity, you know, that not necessarily rejecting truth as such, but rejecting what they would consider a one-sided take on the truth. But see, in the resistance that I see sometimes in people towards the churches, or towards, you know, just faith in their ideas, you know, rightly or wrongly, or their caricatures, but that the churches that were old, were tired, and were one-sided on truth. So they say you're completely predictable.
It just seems to me that the problem of truth is a more difficult problem, as you started out saying, you know, and I think that's true because of our culture. At the same time, you can't just reject the culture and go into some kind of self-righteous snit that means that you've written everybody else off, because you have to live where you are, and besides that, a lot of things are good. And so it's that dialogue, it's that conversation that we don't manage so well. The bishops don't manage it too well sometimes, and even though we try, and others don't manage it any better as far as I can see. So we go back to, I think, what you were saying early on. What's the vehicle for creating conversations that do change the culture?
See, if I can risk naming something rather quickly, see, again, from what I hear, okay, the secular critique of us, they'd say the churches, you know, not just the Roman Catholic Church, but the churches, they say that we have been one-sided on eros, on sex, on women, and related issues. It's probably the single biggest critique. So they'd say that we're not even so much saying that you're not right on some of those points, but they'd say that if you look at, I mean, that's where the culture, where it hits us, you know, on so many of those areas.
Well, I know I hear that all the time myself, but I mean, is the culture done so well on eros?
No.
Okay, has the culture done so well on women? I mean, all the horror stories that you go back, unless you want to take ordination, which is a theological issue, but the church evolved in the same way that the society evolved. Go back and take a look at women in the 40s, women in the 30s. Yeah. Okay, well, the society was as bad as the church, if you want to put it that way then. You know, it...
don't get me wrong, culture hasn't got the answers on those.
Well, some answers they do.
But we're supposed to have the answers on those.
Well, I think that also...
But basically they're accusing us of being one-sided.
Yeah,
they're saying, you're saying accept certitude or truth, but they're saying, well,
it depends on the
we're
issue.
not sure we'll accept your certitude or truth.
Yeah, it depends on the issue. But you also should see where the culture has, for example, we really have addressed racism in this country, I think, in a very, very exemplary way. I think we'd be very proud of that. And we've addressed other things, well, immigration.
No, I think
we're not there yet. But
we're ahead of everybody else.
Well, to some extent, yeah. But so, you know, there are very good things. And then you have to ask, well, why did those happen? What's the meta-narrative for that happening? And can we go into it or can't we? I mean, one of the necessities about social teaching of the church is that it has to have some impact on society. And I think where we were having some good impact until the sexual revolution. And maybe it's because we're too simplistic. I don't know whether I would accept that, but it's at least worth arguing about. But when you're just written out of the conversation entirely because you uphold certain moral standards that have been the collective wisdom of the human race for several thousand years, and suddenly you got a generation that says, no, we've got it all together in ways that you don't, and the consequences are pretty bad, not only in the confessional, but in the hospitals and in the streets and in the homes. To get that business about we're too one-sided is just arguable, but I'm not ready to buy it yet.
In our communities, can we model that kind of careful conversation of listening that fosters not only the conversation, but a deeper sense of self-awareness? Because part of the reaction people have against certitude sometimes too is a matter of not wanting to look too much inside themselves. And so you find something outside to really knock out against rather than dealing with the issues that are at stake.
I think that when we look at the church today and people think that we look culturally and we say we're pretty much of a cultural mess here, and we have everybody making these accusations against us about what the church has not emphasized or what they have caused people to repress and so forth and so on, I think we really have to recapture a sense of the church as the place where we can truly develop our personality, where our humanity comes to its fullness, and where we find true freedom. And the understanding of how you are formed in community and keeping the balance between the individual and the community, rather than giving necessarily an emphasis to one or the other over against each other, falling into either communism or the individualism that we experience today.
I really think the search is for a new maturity, and that what the world is looking for us, to us, unconsciously, and our own kids, is for us to show how we can walk like in the freedom of secularity, which I think is a great gift. Freedom is always a great gift. We're the freest people who have ever walked this planet. And that's a great gift. And I would never want to denigrate freedom on the basis of the gospel. So I think our task is, how do we walk in this freedom and show our kids and show a culture how you can do it? Now, the individuality, I think, is excessive. The freedom, though, is good. I think it needs to be defended. We're meant to be free, and I think that's we see that with the tension now we have with Al-Qaeda, who are really at an archetypal level. They're saying you're not meant to be this free, and human beings can't carry this kind of freedom. It's abusive, and oftentimes we do abuse it, and they would like to roll it back. See, my idea is, no, we don't roll it back. We have to jack up our maturity to match that, and and again, directionally, I think there's a lot of things we need to do with that, directions we need to go. And one of them is, I think, in the tension of our culture, this is the struggle. I think, and maybe the archetypal struggle between liberals and conservatives, and that is we need to be able to bless the good things of the world and the culture. And that's not abstract. It's energy, it's color, even it's eros to a certain extent, and so on. And at the same time, to be able to go where the cross of Christ is, stand there and speak for that, to speak the hard truths of self-sacrifice. I know you've written eloquently on that and so on, that people can still give their lives and self-donation, the importance of the poor, and to kind of hold them both so that we don't let go of either the wisdom of the cross or the energy and the color of our world. Because otherwise we're going to make our kids unconsciously pick between the two. I think that's what they're doing.
I think they have, but it seems to me that people might find freedom differently depending upon their generation. I think why sometimes we look at the younger people and say they're so conservative is because they've been there. They've been to the single bars. They've been to all these wonderful things that seem to offer freedom, and they know that they're not free. And they come to the church because they want freedom. I don't think we have to convince them that we have freedom. They've kind of given up on the kind of freedom, it seems to me they have to some extent, that the world offers. And that maybe people of my generation are still a little bit enamored of because we were raised without it in a church that was too stuffy. They don't know that church. And so if they come to church, it's because they're looking for freedom that they think we have, and we have at our best. So it depends, I think, on your past experiences where you're going to look for freedom. So I think we have to be very clear about what gospel freedom is and where it touches on and reinforces secular freedom and where secular freedom can be of help to us. But there is a difference between them. It's not that one is free and one isn't. I think it's two different senses of freedom. And maybe we haven't been clear enough on that.
I think that continues to reinforce the challenge for us. Because if you take freedom and you understand that the gospel gives an expanded view of that reality and what that implies for the human person in community and in relationships and not just individual freedom, then the challenge remains for us at the pastoral level. and this is where push comes to shove, how do you bring that out in a community that you are working with and beyond the boundaries of that particular community? Because the parish is there for everybody that's in that particular area. All people come under that. And what do you do with that in a secular university setting? How do you communicate this reality of freedom to people who are there? Those are the challenges.
But I'd also like to see us really bear down on some other fundamentals, which are, fundamentals of the gospel. Respect, in a plurality, respect and dialogue, loving our enemies, we haven't been good at that at all, and I think, and those are the things that at the end they're going to make or break us, and just in our openness, or I want to name one other thing, I think where we've really been weak and are weak, and so is everybody else, and that is to truly have an empathic feeling for the world. I get the sense that sometimes we're gleeful when the world is imploding. A lot of religious people are happy that AIDS is out there and killing people. I mean, we got to be the opposite. We got to be weeping over Jerusalem. I don't think the world senses that we feel for it. I think the world still senses that we want them to fail so that we can feel good about our own truth. I think that's an unconscious thing, and I think it's an important thing. So I don't think the world feels loved by us at all. They feel, we're trying to teach them, or we have a truth or whatever, but I'm not sure they have a sense that we're empathically concerned about them. That, and I think that's a concern.
I'm a theologian, but the people who really change the world are the saints. And, do we have saints walking in our midst, in our parishes and so on, that embody that? That's
The saints love the world.
Yeah.
It was a very important thing that you said there. Does the world believe we love it? That's a good question. Sometimes it looks like we do, and sometimes we probably don't. But I think that's the key. That's the key question. And so, where do we show the love? Well, worship. Where do we find freedom? Where do we show love? And maybe those are the questions we should ask as we look at the pastoral responses of the church. Because we're going to have to keep doing we're going to keep doing the sacraments, we're going to keep worshiping, we're going to keep teaching, but if we could do it in a way that would demonstrate the attitude you've spoken of, then it might be a little bit more part of the conversation that shapes the world and more successful in bringing people to what we want to see. Because we see the same thing, we see it in a different way. In the foreseeable future, I suppose a lot of people aren't going to come back to church, or we don't know, we hope and pray, but how do we use the institutions of the culture, not the parishes and the retreat houses and all the rest, to at least keep the gospel before people's minds and in their hearts perhaps more effectively than we're doing now?
one of the strategies that's being used, or has been suggested for use in Europe, again in a very different situation, where you have historic church buildings, architecture, using those as, not only as sites of worship, but cultural venues as well. So I think making use of our churches also as public spaces. We do some of that, but perhaps more so is one venue, and saying it is being done in some places.
They of course have historical structures that we don't have, but nonetheless we could look at that. It still, however, becomes the church where you're entering into our space. How do we enter into their space more effectively while remaining ourselves?
This is where I really believe that if we became communities, full, active, conscious participation in the art of dialogue on questions, really helping people acquire the sense of the word and the discipline, the asceticism that is required for them to be able to dialogue. And perhaps more so this should be taking place in universities.